Okay, we're on. Right. Welcome everybody for the first meeting for the new year. We have an agenda in front of us, and would Alex like to open?
Sure. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, he hei, mauri ora.
Do we have any apologies? No. Thank you. Declarations of it. Anybody want to table? No, thank you very much. Standing orders. The recommendation there is to follow this, suspend this for the duration of the meeting. The standing orders noted there in the agenda, and also around option C under section 22. I've got a mover in a second to. Thank you very much. In favour?
Aye.
Carried. Righty-ho. Okay, we have our friends from Wellington online. Wellington coming. We'll come back to the minutes. Yeah, we'll come back to the minutes. Yeah. We'll come back to the minutes because we have you already online and we're running 5 minutes late. So welcome, Stuart and Leanne and team. Can you hear us?
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for your audit plan for the coming year. Shall I hand over to you, Brent, to lead us in this conversation, and we'll hear from Stuart and the team.
So, online, down the bottom of our screen, we've got Stuart March, who's been the audit partner here for the last couple of years. And in the top left, we've got Leanne Austin, who is going to be partner this year due to timing constraints. And next to her is Kieran Wright, who is a audit manager, and he's been involved in our audits in previous years as well. So they're going to be leading the audit team this year. So the purpose of today's meeting is this topic is to discuss the audit plan and what they are going to be looking at and the timing and the costs and so on. So like normal, the things that they'll be interested in are things like rates and grants and expenditure and debt and so on. And obviously following on from the cyclone, a particular interest in cyclone recovery and infrastructure. But it's all detailed in the audit plan that's attached to this report. And I'll hand over to Leanne and Stuart to talk further about the details.
Thank you, Brent. Look, I might just lead off just to sort of explain why there's a cast of thousands from EY attending the meeting. So you'll obviously be familiar with me having worked with you for the last 2 or 3 years as the appointed auditor. Look, we've just been working with the Office of the Auditor General and looking ahead to September. Council's obviously keen to get their annual report adopted by your election or before your election. And so, and at the same time, the Office of the Auditor General has asked me to support another council in the South Island who are having a couple of challenges. And actually that's where I am today. And so we're just looking in terms of ability to actually get through things and support you adequately in September, and felt that it would be appropriate to introduce Leanne Austin as the signing partner for 2025, and then sort of see how that goes into the future as well. Leanne, would you like to introduce yourself? I mean, and particularly emphasise the fact that way back, sorry, I'm trying to make you feel old, you were the audit senior on Central Hawke's Bay probably 10 to 12 years ago. So Leanne, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. As said, my name's Leanne. I am an audit partner. I've been with EY for about 18 years in total. I started my career in the UK in financial service audit, but I have actually been in New Zealand for the past 14 years working with EY. And as Stuart mentioned, I did do Central Hawke's Bay Council back in 2022. So he is right. It was about 13 years ago now. So quite some time ago, but I've been involved in a number of public sector entities over the past 13, 14 years of being in New Zealand. working on core government, some local authority, and also, you know, some of the Crown entities such as ACC.
And we've also got Kieran Wright, who has probably had about 4 or 5 years experience with Central Hawke's Bay over the course of the last 10 years. He was formerly the audit manager. We had somebody who left the firm last year, and so we're bringing Kieran back onto the team. So that's kind of the introductions. Just in terms of our plan, we were happy to sort of take it as read, but as Brent outlined, you know, heavy focus this year on the infrastructure assets again. You're still recovering from Cyclone Gabrielle, so your operating tempo remains high. There's still a lot of capital works being undertaken, and there's still a lot of funding to still be received under those additional funding streams from central government. We're also conscious of where you're at with Three Waters and the evaluations that are being undertaken by WSP for the various councils around the Hawke's Bay. And we're just sort of keen to ensure that those are appropriately considered, ideally well before balance date, because I understand that WSP timeline is well progressed. We'd like to, you know, look at those and discuss those with management before we get to 30th of June, because the less that we have to do and talk about in September, the better. My role will switch to being a client servicing partner. I will basically be Leanne's wingman, fly top cover for her, be available for any questions and queries. On the 25th, I think it is, Leanne and I will be working our way around the building, meeting all the GMs, just for a proper in-depth catch up with everybody's area of focus. Probably just leave it there, and all the difficult questions can be dealt with by Kieran and Leanne, but I'm happy to take any questions or queries from members.
Just a general question, Stuart. I noticed that you've got your areas of focus in your audit, but has the OIG specifically asked you to look at certain things? From my experience with these things, they may focus on certain things every year, and I just wondered if they had any focus areas this year.
Oh, look, most of their updates at the present time are really around how Three Waters is impacting local government, and being really conscious about what state, you know, every auditor is required to go out and understand what state councils are in terms of their discussions with other local authorities or within their own planning, and how any consultation that may happen between now and 30th of June is being flowed into a potential impact within annual reporting. Now, it's unlikely that final decisions will be made. I mean, obviously, you've got to file your documents by, I think it's the 6th of September, and so things will be sort of in train, shall we say, when we get to annual report sign-off time. But it's just that consciousness. On top of that, you've still got the standard old sort of procurement, sensitive expenditure, and appropriateness of performance reporting in the public sector that the Office of the Auditor General is very focused on.
Thank you.
Hi, Stuart. Hi, Leanne. Hi, Kieran. Nice to see you all. I'm interested in, we've got a 3-year plan where you're going to be doing an auditing on a year of a budget, which was through legislation on a non-audit path. Does that impact how you're going to audit for the annual report at the end of the year?
No, as part of our core audit of the annual report, we don't have an obligation to sign off on the annual plan numbers. Obviously, that presents us with probably less insight to what built up those plans. But obviously, at the same time, you know, things have been moving pretty quickly over the last couple of years. So we will always reference and consider your performance against your annual plan or your long-term plan. But in regards to whether it'll impact the level of work we have to do or the confidence we have, it shouldn't have a material impact on our approach to things.
Okay, so ability to test the performance on the assumptions and the documented budgets and targets which are in the 3-year plan is not a kind of. I suppose what I'm trying to get at is making sure we're not going to have a standoff situation where it's our team saying these are the assumptions we've made and we made this plan, but then you guys come and say that that's not good enough performance when actually it's just on the assumptions that we have built the plan.
Yeah, but we're only auditing the actuals. We're not auditing the plan. I mean, there's always that we will always give you feedback if we think some of your performance measures are a little bit off target. Not off target in terms of you didn't have continuity of water supply or something like that. But if we don't think your performance measures tell a round enough story in regards to activity areas, then we will give you some feedback that next time you're establishing performance measures, you might want to cover off certain areas. So so we're not auditing you to sort of say, well, you haven't achieved that plan. We're just sort of saying it's a reference point. The performance measures, you set out your performance framework, and we're just trying to sort of make sure you're capturing what the organisation is doing.
And so just kind of following on from that, in your medium risk areas is the non-financial performance reporting area, which you've just connected to as well, but it's a new 3-year plan cycle. So does that take more resource to test those non-financials, because we do have some different performance measures in there?
Leanne or Kieran, I'm doing all the talking. Do you want to have a go at that one? I can help, but you go for it.
No, absolutely. Look, yes, there is additional time that will be spent just to understand them and to understand the process to collate that information. But that's a normal procedure that we do on an annual basis anyway with measures. So it will be identifying the key measures and then walking through those processes to understand how you collate the information and what information we'll be receiving. So some additional work, but nothing that's unusual to what we do as normal audit procedures every year.
And we build that into our workload expectations. And you've also got the core of your DIA based measures do represent the big ones that we really focus on. But obviously, if there are other changes, we need to understand how your performance information is flowing. But that's inside our expectations. Yeah.
There's a process in which we've got to make sure we're presenting that data up in a good way that we've internally tested it. We do that anyway in the quarter before it's up in the quarterly report, but that's actually a responsibility that we've got to make sure it's put up in a form that's actually accessible, and they're not having to run around in circles trying to find different sources of data. So it's a key part of what we do as part of the audit.
Whether it's actually the auditors to answer this question or someone in the council, but I read with interest on page 13, it states, therefore they are requesting the original planned audit fee for 24-25 of 164K plus GST be increased to 179K plus GST for the recovery of the additional work occurred in 23 and 24 and then expected additional work for 24-25.
I'll answer that to start with, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chairman, so Stuart, that's in our council agenda, which talks about the additional work that wasn't factored into year 2 for recovery work. So, do you just want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure.
They haven't got your 3 or 4 pager that came later.
Okay.
It came supplementary to the audit plan. So,
look, I'm more than happy to talk to that. Look, so we are currently operating under a three-year audit proposal letter. So that covered the financial years FY23, 24, and 25. Now, that was written in basically early to mid 2023. And so that, getting my years right, that was shortly after the cyclone impacted the Hawke's Bay. And it was very hard at that point in time to determine the extent of the work that would be required to be undertaken. Now, so what we did back then in 2023 was to say, oh, we think it might take us 75 more hours in 2023 to consider the Cyclone Gabrielle matters, and that we've thought that that might drop to just needing 25 hours in 2024, and that we would clean the decks and not have any additional effort or required above norms in 2025. So we had nil hours for 2025 in our original proposal. Now, I'm a strong believer that a fixed fee is a fixed fee, but at the same time, the extent of the work required for council to respond to Cyclone Gabrielle in terms of the additional spend, in terms of the impairment of assets, in terms of the additional funding from central government, and all the implications associated with that additional workload, has been in 23 and 24 substantially larger than caused the audit effort to be substantially higher than required. We did not come back and said, right, well, you've had a hard enough year in 23. You don't need auditors asking for some more money. So we left that one behind us. In 24, we've just asked for a small additional funds to basically sort of say, hey, we probably incurred 100 to 150 hours of work in regards to the increased operational tempo of council, and the impact on your balance sheet of the recovery effort for Cyclone Gabrielle. And we know, as we sit here today, that continued capital works and other associated matters have carried on into 24-25 in regards to that. And so we were seeking a small adjustment to our fee associated with that, and have provided a detailed letter to management to support our sort of thoughts. We're allowed to do this under our guidance from the Office of the Auditor General, but obviously it's a negotiated position, and so if ask management and council to consider our proposal.
Yeah, that'll be under discussion.
Yeah, we'll take it offline. Any other questions? Stuart? Good. In terms of the recovery work that still needs to go on, the quote you've given us to do that you're comfortable that we met, there's not any additional stuff that's going to pop out of the work?
Look, I'm confident that we will stick to that number in terms of fees charged. There's always going to be complexities. There's always challenges in terms of the capitalization of your large recovery projects, the different funding streams that you receive from government, but we're more aware of the nature of that and the scale of that work that's required to be satisfied with how that's reflected into your financial statements. So there is certainly less risk of me, I won't say never, but there's much less risk of us coming back and sort of saying, actually, because of something that the council's done, that's taken us substantially more time to undertake our audit beyond what we've got in our paper.
We learned a lot last year. We learned a lot very fast. So,
Just one other question around the valuation process, because that's a core, third-party input into the evaluation of our balance sheet and how we go forward. This year, my understanding is we've now got WSP and Stantec doing valuations for different sets of assets. Two questions there. One is, and I understand WSP has been done for the region, so what input have we had into that letter of engagement with WSP? Make sure we're getting what Stuart and you need Brent out of that process. And secondly, I presume this hasn't created too much inefficiencies for you?
No, so in a typical year, we value roading every year. So Stuart and Leanne will be particularly interested in the roading valuation because at present time, we've got some impairments remaining from Cyclone Gabrielle, and as we do the repairs, those impairments disappear. So it's a matter of testing the cutoff and where we're at in that repair process. The other valuations are land, buildings, and 3 waters. They are all typically done on a 3-yearly cycle, unless we have some sort of construction inflation issue like we've had in the last couple of years. And normally they're staggered, so we do 1 a year. However, all the stars aligned the wrong way for us last year, and we valued absolutely everything. So we're not actually due technically to do any valuations other than roading this year. However, because of the local water done well work that we've been doing, there's been concern expressed by some of the other CFOs in the district that we all have different valuers. We all use slightly different assumptions and life expectancies and unit rates and so on. So if we're going to set up a potential Hawke's Bay water CCO, the asset transfers need to be done at a common valuation method. So we have engaged external to do that for the region, but as part of that, they are also providing us individual reports, which we can then provide to EY and Value Audit New Zealand to support. So we will be receiving or have already received a draft water valuation done by a different consultant to Stantec. And obviously that's giving slightly different numbers to Stantec because some of the assumptions have changed. My initial read of the draft that I've seen is that it's not materially different, but is slightly higher. And obviously we'll then have to have a discussion with EY and the stable as to whether we want to book that change and reflect it. And then obviously that causes an issue down the track as to whether we go back to Stantec and then have potentially some of those assumptions unwound should water remain with us in the future, or whether we carry on with this new consultant and the new methodology. So that's something we've got to work through with EY yet. But
Even
that's
washing up the differences between valuers as well. So it's just
yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Stuart, Leanne and Tim?
If I may, Chair, in relation to the valuations, we're obviously keen to see that and see Brent and the team's reflections on any sort of material differences or immaterial differences. I also do the audit of Hastings District Council, and a colleague of mine does the audit of Wairau District Council. So we will be seeing the WSP valuations from various different angles and understand kind of how that's sort of impacting across the bay. And essentially, we just really want to understand, are there idiosyncrasies associated with Central Hawke's Bay that would require you to book it, or would mean that, actually the differences are not that material, but it's something that I'd like to work through with management over the course of the next month or two, rather than, leave to 30th of June.
Sounds pragmatic to me. Yeah, we don't want to leave this to the last minute. Okay, is any other questions? Anything else from you, Stuart, Leanne?
No. Just looking forward to getting up, and we'll sort of see everybody in the management team on the 24th, and then work through the program of work so that we can meet with council, or we'll meet with this committee prior to the council adopting the annual report in late September, early October.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your audit plan and the additional resources, and welcome Leanne as the appointed auditor now too. So we look forward to seeing you later in the year.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Tim, so we go back and get about interview. So are you comfortable with the explanation you've got, or?
Really, no. You know, as a councillor, we've been going through our budget annual plan, cutting out money as hard as we can and going everywhere to really cut it out. And suddenly get an order to come in and start wanting another $15,000, which I actually think would be pretty excessive to start with. And as you pointed out, we're getting the thing that they double with the public one is.
Yeah.
I'm pretty uncomfortable with it. Actually, I'm pretty uncomfortable with that fee, full stop. It signs it off.
Unfortunately, this has been negotiated prior to our time.
Yeah,
So the
well, it
word
was actually my time, but I was uncomfortable at the time.
And maybe just kind of, so the base agreement, again, with the fixed fee, it's been locked and loaded for that period of time. But as we do, we'll go back with Stuart and the team and again, we'll ensure that we're getting value for money and it's right sized. But just probably speaking from the lessons learned out of last year's audit, particularly in the recovery space, we spent a lot longer in that whole activity than we'd anticipated, and on the basis that there was a much smaller assumption of 25 hours. Of already just even the conversation around valuation, we haven't even reached into the conversation about impairment of roading assets properly, and those assets that we're choosing to write down or potentially not replace. So I dare say that they'll be earning that 17,000 will be well and truly used in terms of the recovery. I acknowledge the point that it's more, but certainly when we entered into the base fee agreement with it, again, there were some assumptions that were put in just like we do budgets. It is the mature thing to do in terms of raising that with us. But we'll test, and again, we'll go away and test that still with Stuart.
Observations on. I think the key thing for us is at the next anniversary of 3-year cycle, that's when we target the base fee and really try to understand what that's made up of. Because that's actually a negotiation with the Board of General, not with my understanding. So, and I just, there's no detail in here how they've arrived and charge out rates and stuff. This is where they're spending their time. So there's some estimated hours, but it's not broken down by focus area. And that means that is there work that our team can do preparation for that to reduce the, we've got 90% of it and to actually reduce their time. Our work paper is good enough stuff because it is significantly higher than what I've seen in some other places. So. Okay.
Just ask the question, do they give you a spreadsheet or something, you just fill it all out, Brent, or how does it work? Because I know with Audit New Zealand, they have a whole a portal that you put all the information into the portal for them, and they do their work from there, and there's not much interaction between the staff and the audit. It's all through the portal.
Yeah, so Ernst Young use a portal as well. And in fact, it was very useful during the COVID period where they couldn't actually visit in person, and we were able to, they would send through the portal a series of questions and divvy them out dependent on who the subject matter expert was. And then we were able to collect all the data and documents that they wanted, upload them to the portal so that they could see them. So certainly that is a tool that they use, and it does save some time, but yes, obviously they still check the same number of documents. Just because it's automated, it doesn't stop that. And Stuart's point about recovery, our typical turnover in a given year, BAU would be around the $50 million mark. During the cyclone recovery for the last 2 years, it's been more like 70 million. So there's a $20 million additional funding, $20 million of additional expenditure, difficulties with the valuations. So I certainly felt Stuart's pain when he was auditing both those things. So. Thanks.
A statement and a question, so if they're running out of time and the money, wouldn't they have just backed off one or two things that are not quite so important? And I do remember some comments around here during the audit last year of how detailed and a few other comments that they were.
Yeah,
Demonstrates robustness.
I'm not sure that was the word I'd use.
no, auditors are black and white. They have something on their list, they've got to put a tick next to it with their green pen.
Satisfying.
Yeah, I think the timing of asking for the 24 uplift is probably a bit. Could be a bit late. Could have been done earlier at the time. They could have identified the fact we're actually about to do 10 grants worth. Why we're here and saying, can we do so? That is a valid point as opposed to writing to us saying, want to backdate a number which upsets your budgeting process because it's now in the next year's numbers. Us, we have done it this year with this $5,000, so we've got to hold them to a $5,000 and that's it.
And equally, we have done the same thing.
There is a context that the OAG just doesn't want to hear it. Like the settings that they're operating under, like local government has been trying to point this out with OAG and with government for years and years and years and years, and nobody has ever listened or ever cared. And currently OAG are positioning themselves in this thing for local government where there's a context of ministers wanting to talk about things like rates, caps and benchmarks and performance measures and stuff. And so the role of audit that the OAG has been tasked to do all of a sudden has a whole lot more, dare I say it, political importance to the Wellington Masters. And so it's almost like we can do what we can at our hands-on level of what we can maybe do here, but at a higher advocacy level, it's just, it's deaf. It's a deaf audience, Councillor Aitken. And I believe me, I've been in the one-on-one interactions with the OAG on behalf of LGNZ, and they just really don't want to hear it.
There is an element of certainly the qualitative aspect of the balance sheet and getting that right. Basically, the performance of the council against a series of targets and so that's the qualitative side. I know they're getting a lot more into that, but it's that can be done differently in other ways by using a financial auditor who's got rates that are averaging at $300 an hour. You can get somebody in at $150, $100 to do that qualitative stuff. So what, one of the things, the good thing about it is actually split that out. Get a local provider to come and review your performance reports. That's all. In no disrespect, that's what it is. Is you set yourself some goals and targets. You said you would meet these standards, meet those standards, and you're doing that anyway internally. And why can't we just get somebody for $5,000 to run the all over and saying, yeah, that's right. Being an annex to the annual report. These are the sorts of things that
Alignment with OAG.
Anyway,
That's very pragmatic and sensible. Sensible, but unfortunately, I've been down the same rabbit hole. I have tried to change auditors, do all sorts of things until I'm blue in the face. I've had chief executives and things involved with audit.
you might have a more.
It's Auditor General. It is. They are not receptive to good ideas.
No. And they take a philosophical view. And in fact, I've got a presentation in front of me that I was heard in Wellington last week. We're the custodians of huge assets. Well, for us, it's $1 billion worth of assets. And their view is councils are given the power to tax and collect rates. And with this power comes responsibility. Basically, where OAG sees their role is to make sure we're being responsible.
Different to an investment fund where we bring money in offshore and it's like, and the audit fees half the price. They're listed.
And they'd like to take money off us.
And we have as many in which you have more valuations that need to be done than we do with every value. And we value every quarter.
Welcome to local government.
Okay.
Let's change it.
Well, I think it's can't die in one room, so we have a crack. So I think the action is at the next anniversary, Brent, we'll have a think about how we might approach this. And
We'll make a note of it.
I think that's all we can do at this stage. Right. If that's the conclusion of our discussion around this year's audit, thank you, Brent, for organising all that. And I think you've got a good timetable there to actually get to the punchy stuff early, so we're not being held up. Right, let's now go back to, or you have reminded us to go back to the minutes. Right, good, yes, so yes, we've got the audit recommendation. So we, that we note the audit plan for this coming year.
You were waiting me very reluctantly.
All in favour?
Aye.
Carried, thank you very much, thank you for reminding me. Carried.
I want to become an auditor.
Guys, standing orders. We're now down to the minutes. So. So we have the minutes from the previous meeting. From us. We're comfortable they are true and fair. Another meeting. That's the case. Yeah, carried. Thank you very much, everybody. We're on to sorry, we're on to the
Resolution.
resolution. Yeah,
Page 11 it is.
resolution monitoring report. And over to you.
Mr. Chair. So just noting in terms of the actual resolutions, we've got work that's continuing in relation to the insurance renewal processes and the loss modelling. We've got an update at the next risk and assurance meeting. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so where we're at with the loss modelling is Aon have approached all the CFOs in the Hawke's Bay district end of last year and suggested to us all that it's time to relook at our loss modelling. And can we please, here's some pricing. We would like to go out to the market and engage a consultant to do it. I haven't had an update this calendar year yet as to what everyone's feedback was, but I definitely stuck Central Hawke's Bay's hand up and said, yes, I'd like to be involved. So I'll need to follow up with Aon to see where the other 4 councils are at. And obviously if it doesn't proceed at a regional level, then I'll need to look at doing a local independent reassessment.
And what's the timing for that? We've got time to do all this.
My understanding was that Aon was hoping to get feedback from everyone in sort of January, February, because they wanted to get on in March, April and get the loss assessments done so that they were done well before the next insurance renewal, which would be kicking off in sort of July. So it is getting to the point that I need an answer as to whether we're doing our own or a combined one.
We can look back for the next insurance, probably looking on the papers from August last year, and there's a number of actions. So we'll actually look back.
Is it possible to let us know what the progress is on it? Because my experience with these things with Aon and stuff, it can go on and on and on. And there's a whole lot of people involved with it and it just doesn't get any traction. And before you know it, we're in June and we haven't got it done. And they've already demonstrated that already by not having it done time. So is it possible for you to let us know what the status is so that we can keep the pressure on them?
I'll follow that one up.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thank you.
Just noting in terms of the actions here, Mr. Chair, everything's on track. So,
Right, we have a recommendation that we note report. Move in a second, please. Thank you. Thank you much. All in favour? Aye. Very, thank you much. Right. Righty ho. Next on the agenda is our risk status reports. Right.
Thank you. Good afternoon to the Chair and the committee. Before you is the regular risk status report, but there are a number of changes included in this report. So background, which is included in the introduction, I just wanted to walk through and then I'll go in a little bit more detail. The key thing to note is that in the workshop that we did with Council back in November last year, there are a number of actions from that. Some of the less complex changes I included in the December report the last time we met, and indicated that we would need some more time to work on some of the risks that needed to be included at the ELT level. That work's now been done, and those risks have been included in the report. So while I wouldn't normally talk to some of these risks because they're not out of appetite, the language that we normally use, I will go through them so that we know which ones are the new ones that are in there, and happy to have any discussion on those, just acknowledging I wouldn't normally do that. Yes, perfect. Okay. So if we get into the attachment, so the first ones to talk to are both new within the Prosperous District section. And the first one that's been added in there is in relation to the risk around the local water done well and associated regulatory reform. The cause of the risk being the complexity of implementing the legislation whilst we're also trying to maintain the regional alignment. The second one there is the risk that was requested to be put in regular discussion around council table about the risk to the Central Hawke's Bay landfill and the volume to which could potentially decrease below the minimum viable level to keep the landfill operating. Those are the two there. Do you want any discussion before I move on, or would you like to come back for any questions?
Yes. It's the very first risk, the Proud District ones. We've got the very first one there says council has a council loses social license in the community. They seem to be much the same though. One's a subset of the other. But they've got different appetites. Why is that? They're both low appetite, but yet it's the colour. Is it the colouring that's wrong?
Yes, so through the chair, apologies, there is a colour, incorrect colour on the top one. It should be green, the appetite. I've also noted that. So, yes.
So, and my second question was around the prosperous, because you've just talked about that. Wouldn't one of the controls be keeping the community engaged around all of this? So what are we doing to tell the community about it all?
Sure. So through the chair, I think you're talking about the first risk.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, and the control there, I think, acknowledges your point. The fifth one, it says transparent engagement and communication. So that could encompass a number of things, but I think the appropriate place to go into more detail about that would be when we do a gap analysis on that risk and go through all of the controls in detail. However, would be happy to connect you with anyone on that topic specifically to talk about controls ahead of that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Saw that. I didn't link the detail between the two, so it's probably in that extra handout. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so into strong communities. The first one to make a comment on there, where there is a note where it's out of appetite, just to acknowledge there's no substantial update to that risk that is sitting outside of appetite, which is the CHB community's response to a natural disaster. But just to note that that is one of the items which we have a gap analysis for in the workshop later this afternoon. The last one on that page is new, again at the request of an action out of the workshop with the council. And the new risk is that the roading recovery isn't fully completed to the community's expectation. And that's due to the uncertainty of central government funding and NZTA approvals. And then into any questions on those, sorry, before or discussion, we can move
on. The serious injury one, the second one, serious injury or loss to life of members of the community and council facilities. You've got the council has a moderate appetite to take risk. I'm a little surprised. I thought that would be council has a low appetite to take risk. But it's just subjective, I know, but I just wonder, given it's a health and safety type thing.
I'll leave that one, Mr. Chair, and happy to take feedback from elected members. Part of that might relate to the level of risk we've been willing to take around things like the buildings. So if we were had an absolutely zero level of risk appetite, buildings would be shut. But we've chosen to accept a level of risk in some buildings. We've still put some controls in place to mitigate those risks, but that's still a risk that we are willing to,
So
not low.
yes, another way to do it would be to have a low appetite for the risk, but be out of risk appetite. So you say we don't want to have any risk, but we're forced to have risk because we have to use the buildings. And we don't want to demolish the buildings. It's going to cost us too much. Therefore, we're going to be out of appetite, and we'll do all the things we possibly can, but we're not pulling it down. We're going to keep using it. See what I mean? It's the semantics.
And the other thing is to be more specific. So this is really general.
Yes.
What it should say is
Specifically,
the CHB Municipal Theatre, the Memorial Hall in Waipokoro, which are both open, accepting some level of risk, compared to the Waipokoro Library, which is shut because the level of risk is too high there. So if it was specific, it would actually make more sense.
Yeah, okay, that's all right. I just
Rather than generically across all of our facilities, it's actually really specific
great
about those
point.
ones. Yeah.
we might look into that one perhaps and just workshop.
I was just thinking about the roading recovery. Is it fully completed to the community's expectations? And we had got obviously ongoing conversations with NZTA as the co-funder, but we talked about it recently at council, so about the ongoing conversations with community. And I think maybe that could be controlled as well, because obviously if you're continuing to talk to the community, then actually they're not disappointed and they're not, they know why we can't bring it up to their expectation. And I think, that's probably controlling.
So through the chair, thank you, councillor. Certainly we're finding as we go into the gap analysis for each of these, we find that there are controls that may have been overlooked or new things to include. So I'll note that down for including it. And when we get to that, we'll have a more in-depth conversation in that workshop. So across to connected citizens. The first risk on their council's inadequate response to a natural disaster or civil defence emergency. Noting first of all that that's one of the risks included for today's workshop. And there is an update there in terms of the strategy that's now been adopted. And there's an update to the action there in terms of what's happening as a result of that. The second risk there, that in relation to a major privacy breach of customer information, the language has been refined. An action out of the workshop was to make the risk more specific, that it wasn't just a cyber attack to all of the organisation, that specifically it was a risk to the privacy of our customer information. So the wording as such has been updated, and there are some notes there in the actions. Just to make the committee aware that, for example, we had a full IMT exercise last week on that exact scenario. There's also our audit coming up in that area, but any actions and recommendations that come off the back of that will obviously be included into the work program. The last one on that page is an update. So in the waters area, the update to this risk is that the appetite being low, it was an amber. This quarter, we have increased the residual risk to taking a higher risk. The reason there in the note is the work has progressed in that area of note. The operational technology assessment has now been completed, and officers now better understand the risk, and the action has been updated for that risk as well. We also have Mr. Swinburne here if there's any specific questions on that one.
Just on that, there was nothing, no major concerns came out of that work, was there? But,
In terms of the key risks that we were trying to we were
Yeah,
concerned about.
yeah.
We had to take some risk on the evening involved, Mr. Chair, so we now understand those risks a little bit, but there's still underlying residual risk, which we can talk about a little bit later on, but it's one of the things we're going to delve into further on with the case.
Sorry, you referring to the shutdown of Waipoka Network?
No,
I was just talking about the fact that we've actually got some technology driving our water system.
Sorry.
So it's effectively what it's, so.
Yes, so sorry, through the chair, just to clarify that one's separate. It is in the infrastructure. One of the infrastructure risks later. No, that's totally okay. It's easy. There are lots of water risks, so easily to transfer them. So your question, Chair, was, has there been anything out of that assessment in particular? So Mr. Swinburne, that might be appropriate for you to speak to.
Good afternoon. Members of the committee, and through you, Chair. So the assessment has been completed. To be fair, it's incredibly detailed and actually quite complex to understand. We needed some help just to work through the actual assessment itself. There's a number of things that have been identified in there where we can improve our systems and network in terms of operational technology within the water space. And at the moment, we obviously need to work through a program or a bit of a planning process as to how we might undertake a number of the recommendations listed in that assessment. For clarity and transparency, they weren't things that were necessarily on our radar and therefore haven't been included in some of our previous planning. So we need to make sure we go through and update that and ensure we can program out, budget it, et cetera, et cetera.
These things are connected to the internet. Soon as it is it sorry, the system's connected to the internet, and so they've got those sort of.
I just had a general question. It's probably me being a bit pedantic. It's just how the risk is worded. We talk about councillors unable to remotely monitor the building. But the risk is really the risk is we're unable to monitor something which leads to something else. So if we can't monitor it, what happens? I don't think the risk is well defined. And also with the controls, if it does happen, what is our workaround? So if it's not working, what are we going to do? See what I mean?
So through the chair, I'll answer that in two parts. The first point that you've made, I acknowledge we did have that discussion earlier today. So interesting as we do more in this area, that the more they come back around for a conversation. The risk being the conversation that we'd had earlier is our ability to remotely monitor it doesn't necessarily mean it's not working, because one of the controls there, what are we doing? We are able to physically monitor the drinking water sites, and that is referenced as one of the controls. So we can still monitor and ensure that the dosing levels and everything is safe, correct? I'm looking to Mr. Swinburne here to make sure I'm getting the language right. But in terms of what comes next and what are we doing, that is the work program that Mr. Swinburne's referenced to.
If it's not working, we know it's not working, then we can do something. It's not that it's not working, it's not telling us something we don't know it's not working. You see the difference? So when it doesn't work, we get told it doesn't work. Does it work like that? Or does it just not work and we're not getting any information, and therefore we think everything's fine and dandy? Do you see what I mean?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Without getting too much into the granular detail, because there's a number of different scenarios that could eventuate, there is absolutely a risk that systems could fail, meaning that we're unable to monitor sites and we might not know for
That's
a period
what
of
I'm
time.
concerned about. Yeah.
That period of time is unlikely to be large, but there is that risk. If I go slightly lower into granular detail, part of that system is the operational alarming system. So when something goes out of spec or something fails, it sends alarms, and quite frequently those are not within normal business hours. If the system isn't available, it won't send those alarms. that system is regularly checked, and therefore it wouldn't be for a very long period of time. But it's is absolutely a risk.
So just maybe as some context, and I'm to quite a bit of detail. We did in terms of the risk moving out of appetite and ELT raising this, we did a very similar thing last year who joined us in terms of the Waipukurau Borefield site, whereby we internally, the residual risk hadn't changed. We just knew more, there was a period of time had lapsed, and we said, actually, we need to give this some focus, and we raised the status of the risk. And that's really it's basically the same thing with this risk, where we've had a conversation as ELT. We've said there's actually more work we need to do in this. Don't have all of the detail, but we need to flag it, which we've done by escalating it. It's more work to do, and with some hope of having some clarity on the next steps. It may come back next month, I doubt it. But may not even be anything, but maybe downgraded again. So it's flagging it for a period of time. It's raising it to say, look, they are the things that we are thinking about, and they are not keeping us awake, but it's front of mind, and there's again more detail to come. So, and we can again delve into a bit more of that detail as well once we've got a clear pathway of having now had the review and the assessment work done, working out what we've got to fund it, what are the shortfall risks we've got, what we can control, what's actually the risk that's sitting behind it. So just probably noting we've got more work to do in that, but it's just coming back to the first principles of that's the risk we're trying to flag. That's what's changed. We know more. There's some different understanding, and similar to second supply, which is now we've addressed that issue, resolved it, and we've moved on. So, thank you.
Okay, so the next page, going into the smart growth risks, there are two new risks that have been included in this. So again, I wouldn't normally talk to them, but because they're new, we'll go through them today. And again, both as a result of the workshop with councillors. So it's the second one down, and it's the growth in capital investment and infrastructure is hindered in the flood risk areas, which means there is uncertainty in future wastewater and drinking water infrastructure delivery programs, which impacts growth in the district. And then the second one, or the third one, sorry, in the list, which is also new, that investment in critical infrastructure is delayed in flood risk areas. And that's as a result of a potentially not a full understanding of the risk profiles of council infrastructure. So I'll pause there for a second discussion.
Any questions from anyone?
So through the chair, the last section where there are updates is under durable infrastructure, and it's the last two line items. So the second one down, the failure of drinking water reservoirs, just to note that there is a small update to the action there this quarter, and similar for the last one, which is the failure of drinking water rising and falling mains, that there's also a small update to the wording, but also to note that risk is included in today's workshop, and ties into the water shutdown event that we had recently as well, where we can talk about that in more detail and how it relates to that risk that's noted in this report.
I'm going to say the same thing. How come on the critical roading infrastructure we haven't itemised what the critical roading infrastructure is?
So through the
chair, not specifically.
There have been two changes, apologies, which I failed to mention. So Your Worship, your questions have not been ignored. They're number one and number two. There are new controls that are in there, which I should have pointed out. So I've worked with the land transport manager specifically on your request to, in terms of what the roads are and the critical lifeline roads. Those two have been included, which are the frameworks and ways in which they assess which the roads are. We haven't listed them specifically in here, but those are the processes in which they assess which roads are most critical, which are lifeline assets. And happy to go into what are the roads in a workshop item.
I think that risk started from a very particular Tongara Bridge. And I can't remember the others now off the top of my head, but that's the one that's always raised. Is it particular critical pieces of asset that we couldn't afford to replace if we have a failure, and it would cause a drastic outcome for our communities. And that's where our focus should be, in those areas. And it seems like we've gone from something that was really specific to now something very broad. And it was actually really quite clear to start with, and now it's kind of.
So through the chair, I'm happy to revisit that, and I wonder if it's worth a scoping conversation or workshop
Maybe.
to revisit that part of it. The last conversation we had, I had added examples on here, but it was very much what is front of mind rather than using a tool that the land transport team uses to identify based on a number of factors, what road goes to the top. And the other comment from that team was also that could change at different periods of time, depending on what it is that they're assessing, what the criteria is. So it's not static, but worthwhile having a further conversation, I think, to describe it.
If it's static enough for us to say that the Pukiura Reservoir and the Waipawa Reservoir are specific pieces of critical infrastructure, why is it not specific enough that the Tongara Bridge, or I'm using that as an example, it is a critical infrastructure that, so we're not going to solve it here, but I just want to relay back to you kind of what I'm hearing and going, well, actually, if we're able to do it on one piece of asset and one kind of risk class, why can't we do it for the others? Because if someone was to come to me and say, what are the top of mind things for you in Central Hawke's Bay that you're going to have to deal with? It's going to be very specific. It's not going to be very general.
And so through the chair, I acknowledge that, and it would be fair to say a lot of the specificity work has been put into the water activity, and maybe it's worthwhile moving that focus into land transport. So let us come back to you on that. But I hear your point and acknowledge that.
I just think it's important we get our heads around it, because we have got this challenge with NZTA about how we're going to get them to do the funding support stuff. And if we're not clearly articulating where we see the infrastructure risks on our roading network are, and we're not building the information that supports it, and our case for investment just becomes, it's not compelling.
Very much, I think, a bit of that kind of using Tongara approach. We've gone from being quite specific, again, just using bridges as an asset class, versus groups of resilience. So I think that's probably some of that sequential work. I'm just thinking the work that we can go from, particularly with the transport committee, about how do we actually get, it's that kind of piece about making sure we've identified what are the critical routes, then having done the analysis, which we're not, water's further ahead. So I think we're saying the same. I think we just need to make sure we're doing the work and not just sort of, Ranaki Road is the biggest risk that's keeping us awake. So just, so there's a methodology. It's to kind of be a methodology behind it, which is I feel was where we've got with the roading, and not roading, sorry, with the waters. I feel like we've been able to do that. So I think we're just going to work out how do we get that methodology and the approach right.
So through the chair, I understand the methodology is there. It's just not the level of information that you're asking to see.
And just following up on the bridges and that, and I think when I said the water, if water fails, that's a critical life for people, because no fresh water. They're critical, but if a bridge fails, for example, we all can go around it. So it's, as you say, it's the methodology of how critical is that particular asset. If this bridge out here disappeared, it's going to cause major upsets, but it's not going to. We can still survive without it. Whereas if you don't have fresh water, you can't survive without it. That's the way I was sitting.
But it's different, and we've got roading is moderate risk appetite, and water is low. So you're thinking, that thinking is there.
There might be a bridge at a dead end road. That could be the case. That might be a dead end road.
Well, didn't we do a whole lot of work on what our critical arterial routes were?
Yeah, that's that.
I think this is what it was.
That's what it'll get to.
How do we get it? That's what I mean. We'll get to that, won't it? And what is critical?
So action. We can discuss it through. Okay, any other comments in the phone? No? Any other questions? Not, thank you very much. We be to this. Yeah, that the Audit Risk Committee notes the risk status report. A mover and a seconder. Yeah, thank you much. And we all in favour. Carried. Very much. Now move through to the health and safety report.
Donna?
Over to you.
So for you, Mr. Chair, the purpose of this report, as you know, is to provide a high level health, safety and wellbeing information and insight, and to update on health, safety, wellbeing initiatives from the reporting period, 1st of November to the 31st of January. I'll take the report as read, but I just want to highlight a few key points. The first one is I just want to acknowledge that in the report that you have, there is a typo error in the executive summary. And that has actually been changed. So it is the wastewater treatment plants in Waipawa and Waipokoro. So just acknowledging that oversight. Also, I just want to highlight that we have, outside of this report, had an incident that was notifiable to WorkSafe from one of our contractors. The contractor is actually undertaking an internal investigation. And as part of that process, we reviewed our critical incident procedure, which we do for all our events. And we did notice that there was a gap in communication to the risk and assurance team and involving our comms team. So we have updated that, and we will also be updating the other policies and procedures that reflect one thing, the emergency procedure. Also, I want to acknowledge that within this report, there are differences between the reporting stats amongst our contractors, and we continue to work with them closely as we progress through our health, safety, wellbeing management plan. I'll open up to any questions. I think we've talked about wellbeing previously, and we've talked about obviously safety a lot. I'm just wondering, do we do health monitoring, or do we have staff because that are exposed to risks that we should be monitoring? Through the chair, Councillor, that's a really good point. We are actually, tomorrow we have our gap analysis being done by Impact, and that is actually I have put on the list to actually revisit, to actually understand and drill down to that further. Yeah, we do. What we want to do is to actually bring it right down to make sure that what we do in the future is specific to the risks of our workers. So that is in progress, and that is up for review tomorrow with Impact to further divulge into that.
We do some existing kind of well-being / health space. So say you're a wastewater operator, based on your level of exposure, you've got an explanation. So there is that level of
yeah. So through the chair, yes, it's going back to look at what we've got, and is there more that we need to be doing? Is it, has anything changed with, if our health does change?
Just going back to critical risks process. You've got to power that through, because it's clearly an area that is a focus by definition. And I suppose the table we've got on page 4 of the report there's still some not started things, and I note the commentary of it's not. There's things still in place, and we can still operate. But it's like all these things, be nice to close these out and we can move on to business as usual. So I presume it's just it's a one-off activity and you've got to get round to it and stuff. So are we getting through these as quickly as we'd like? Or
Maybe I'll start and then Ms. Ennan can jump in. Probably speaks to a little bit of, she's got a little acronym that she uses, which I didn't quite understand, but the methodology in which we're rolling these out as well. So rather than just kind of writing it, very similar principle to contract management, rather than kind of writing it and just expecting people to jump on a critical risk standard. The process that we're going through is actually the opportunity of developing a draft, working it through, seeing that it's actually working practically on the ground, coming back, reviewing it, so that kind of almost development through learning and exercising at the same time. So that's part of I say it's actually been part of the success of the standards that we've developed today. And Ms. Ennan can probably speak to the standard that's being developed at the moment in terms of I think it was talking about last week, and even just the process we're going through on that. So we could put more resource into it and you'd get the standard. That doesn't mean it would get implemented and it would have the effect. So personally, I'm comfortable with the approach that we're taking. It would always be great to do more and great to drive things through faster.
Yeah.
But it's actually making sure that the standards that we've got, we've prioritised them based on the risks as we understand them. They are in the areas of emphasis, and ultimately it's going to come down to how they are accepted by staff and implemented by staff and contractors. And if we haven't got that process right in the start, you can have the best policy. Doesn't mean it's going to be accepted by staff. So probably don't need to go into any more. But that's kind of been our process to date, which seems to have been quite so.
You're sort of saying the process, because I'm with Andrew on this. I look at these things and I always want to see who's responsible, when's it going to be completed by, and I don't see when it's going to be completed by. But you've sort of explained it, that the process is iterative and some take longer than others because they have to go in a circle a couple of times. So it would be nice to see some dates on here, but I sort of get where you're at. So maybe you could maybe there's a hybrid somewhere in between. Some of them are easy, some of them are not.
Through the chair. So the acronym that Mr. Tate referred to is, I talk about the PDSA, the Plan, Do, Study, Act. And so through developing these, it's actually testing them to make sure that they are right. And so they have all been written in draft, and when anything happens, or any planning we're doing with any work, we're actually referring to these because they are minimum contractor standards, for example, if you're looking at the ones for the contractor. So they are minimum expectations. And what we've started to do is go out and do an assessment. So we actually took one out, which was excavation, onto one of our contractor sites and did an assessment. Did that alongside our engineer from council here as part of learning, because I would not expect them to just pick one of these up and run with it. Although they were involved in the development through the bow tie, it's taking everybody on the journey. And so there is that learning bit involved in that. And I think that's really, really important. And so we're starting to progress that through. We're actually a little bit further ahead than here because we've made some progress since then. Also fitting it on with other systems and processes that are happening within the organisation at the moment, especially with the PDT team and around procurement, getting health and safety involved right at the beginning. It always was in place, but it's just solidifying it and standardising that to be involved, to have a look at the SSSPs. And the hazards and aligning them with our critical risks, and then having these put on our website so that they're visible perhaps to our contractors. So there's a whole lot of process, and it is sometimes hard to put a date on it because we're moving and we're testing and we're changing as we get a little bit further along into this piece here. But I feel comfortable that we are doing with the resources we have, that we are progressing these well, and I have quite good trust in the health and safety team in particular, which we had this conversation for most of our meeting this morning and how we were going to progress this and get our teams on board.
It's an observation, Mr. Chair. It may well be we'll go away. Just think it might well be we could do something like a target date somewhere along the lines of just explaining where things are moving. But we'll do some thinking around how we can best try and describe some of that.
Because there's always a difference in terms of the development phase versus the BAU phase, right? In terms of just, with staff turnover and just making sure everybody's trained and up to date and everything else. So I get all that. And I do take some comfort out of the fact that last night I tried to reconcile, where people are stubbing their toe vis-a-vis what has and has not been completed, and you can get a sense that you are focusing on the priorities, which is based on our the evidence is coming through in terms of things that are unfortunately happening in the workplace. Largely,
And I think the key
driving being the key one, and machinery and people always a recipe for something.
And probably the key point is just because it's a draft that's been written doesn't mean that there's no, like, just because it's draft doesn't mean that we're not using that currently as the minimum standard. So a great example is the working at heights one is one that's been drafted. It's now in progress because of some work that we've accelerated with the working at heights on the municipal theatre, which is the first kind of big at heights work we've done in some time. So some of that's also about the opportunities around. We can put some target dates in there, but actually it's about the learning opportunity at the same time. So so point well noted.
Through the chair, if I could just also highlight that what Mr. Tate was just referring to, that has allowed us to build in other processes to support the actual critical risk, because there's lots of procedures and processes that come outside of that. And it's actually quite timely with our review of our health and safety system tomorrow externally, where that will all be looked at to make sure that we are on track in doing what we agreed to do, to make sure that everything is still relevant with any change of legislation things as well.
And the reviewers are the same ones that did it a few years ago?
So through the chair, yes, it is. It's a different person, same company.
I'm kind of on the critical risk stuff too, to be honest, but it's relating to a practical thing. So I heard on the local news that 2 of our contractors had been physically abused by the public in the road corridor doing their work on Racecourse Road, one of which was punched in the face. So I heard that on the news. And is there an interface between the health and safety reporting and kind of the I've got to ring police, and there's a police interaction, so there's a health and safety piece, which is we want everyone to be well and looked after. There's also an escalation piece in terms of something has been so bad that it's illegal and we've rung the police because this person has been hurt. Is there a correlation in there?
Through the chair, in that instant, police were notified. And the contractor notified the police when it happened, and we were notified that that had happened. When we've had incidents here where that has happened as part of our our emergency procedures and the things that we've been doing around that critical risk, escalation to police, we actually did have an event, an incident that involved some people that came in and made threats to Mr. Tate. And the stance was across the board that zero tolerance, and the police were notified. Yeah. So we're actually adopting a low tolerance for that. So we are escalating that.
Let's make an observation that if police are going to be so transparent as to go on the public news and report those kinds of things, I just wonder whether there needs to be communication to us that there has been this month, there's been 6 notifications of events to police, or just something. It just felt a little bit like a undermining of no surprises, if that makes sense. And it's not because we've necessarily done anything wrong, it's because police are choosing to be very publicly transparent, which I agree with, because we should call that stuff out. But it felt like, considering we are the responsible officers in the PCBU, felt weird to be hearing it on the news. Just saying, so maybe just to think about
some of that would have been just the timelines of the process. But I think we're going to go back to yeah, I understand your point, the no surprises thing, and I think we're begging for that, as you well know. But just probably thinking about what's the process we need to build and that kind of critical incident stuff that says it. So I think there's a kind of, it's been quite clear about what are those agreed escalation points. Versus just the heads up. So just I'll take that away as a note to just follow that one up, and particularly in the light of look, we've done the review post the event that we had involving the contractor earlier this month. So I think look, that's just part of that growing maturity around. We can be clear about communication lines and at what point are we kind of triggering it.
Just a question around that. It seems to be a growing problem in local government. The other board I sit on exactly the same sort of issues. But I just need to get some comfort from you, from this council, that we have training for staff, we've got policies and all of that stuff on all that stuff. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we have undertaken last year de-escalation training.
Yeah.
Which all our staff went through. I am just in the process of organising further training with a company for new staff that have come through as that first priority. And actually this time looking at it a little bit differently to look at our emergency procedures that we can actually have the training that uses that to build scenarios, to do scenario training alongside. And so what that looks at is it's a traffic light. So the low level, and then it escalates and escalates up. So that is a really good way that I saw it, to be able to combine those two things, actually being able to test those scenarios. And also have that training. So I'm just in the process of logistics. I have actually been sending someone of our team to that training next week that's being held by our Hawke's Regional Council, who use this company. So yeah, that's really good. And we have a very good relationship with Hastings Council and HBRC with that training, being able to integrate. So yeah, we are doing that, and that's a yearly thing too.
And I think the other observation is obviously the perpetrator held to account through, and of course, the law, and we can actually know what the consequences of those things are, so we can actually push that out and saying, look, this is what happens if you do this thing. But equally, the person who was abused, or our person who's impacted, making sure we've got support services around them as well to give them the confidence so they can go back to their job. Okay, so there's quite a lot of reporting in here around our contractors, which is fantastic, and I think I tried to get a sense of the trends in here, and are things getting better or worse, or but the level of activity is so much higher. Across the whole portfolio, isn't it? And so it's actually hard to get a sense of, yes, the numbers might be going up, but given the activity that's going on, it's maybe it's tracking the right way.
Certainly the conversation, Mr. Chair, that we have at an executive level is delving into some of those trends, and it's often as simple as that's a focus area that month for the contractor, that they are purposely focusing on near misses this month. That's great. But then from a reporting perspective, what's the spike? So
there's a comment here on page 34. Sorry, this is the old we're saying that contractors pointed out that of workers following the holiday period and time for the dry weather, they're pushed for completion, so there's the tempo is increased. Yeah, it's an interesting observation that see the tempo's gone up, but yeah, I think that was one of those symptoms that was coming through. So okay, any other questions or observations on? Nothing else? The recommendation is to note this report, and thank you very much for all your work in this area. Cheers. And there are actions out of that. So are we comfortable to?
I don't know why I keep
We want to pay
having to do this.
Just sharing it around.
I think
I feel like I'm doing them all.
That's what happens when
old technology, you just had to agree. Anyway, moving to second up and all in favour? Yeah. Carry, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, now we're on charter, sorry, you're back. Sure, sorry. The charter.
Right, so I'll open this one, Mr. Chair, and potentially some clarifications at the end that she's going to support me with. But just noting that we're bringing the charter back for visibility and adoption at this committee. Just noting that it's a key document that sits between technically the executive governance of the organisation and the governance of the Risk and Assurance Committee. Probably some observations, and Mayor Alex made some good observations earlier this week to all of the committee members, particularly about the effectiveness of the policy. And again, probably my initial observation is I think, Mr. Chair, there's probably a really good opportunity here, particularly in the governance charter moving forward. We had a really great conversation about the outputs of the charter and the outputs in terms of the implementation of the system and the report we've just had, but actually what is the opportunity is kind of the interfacing governors of both the business and governance itself around what's the work we're doing, particularly around the assurance reporting framework. So I think that's probably just an observation, particularly this week, and as part of kind of some of that feedback as well, which moving forward we need to build into the work program. But particularly noting on page 63 of the agenda, the assurance reporting framework, and just kind of going through basically both what are the risks, the relationships, and the resourcing. We are reporting on these in different ways across, again, the report you've just had and other reports that come through the committee. What we're not doing is reporting as well as we could do across all of those headings. And some of those headings you don't even get visibility on, which is, so things like the success stories update. There's another one in there around under the next column over, the relationships in terms of internal self-assurance, so the summary of the health and safety recognition and award. So we've got a lot of internal processes that we do in terms of our recognition of those inside the business that are being recognised as leaders. So there's there's actually probably more reporting that we can be doing in terms of how do we give some assurance in terms of that we're meeting the expectations and the scope of the framework. But actually we are ultimately ensuring that together as both parties, we are delivering on our expectations, both in the end, but team, council team. So we've got a little bit of analysis that we can go into in terms of further background on this. In hindsight, we probably should have workshopped this before we brought it to an observation we made earlier this week. But certainly happy to take any kind of feedback generally. Good opportunity, I think, about how, particularly as leaders of the organisation, we lean into this space in this next 12, 18 months to see the governance charter really brought to life, rather than, again, a little bit like the policy conversation we just had. It doesn't sit on this shelf. It's actually it's a live and focused conversation between us.
Observations, comments.
The lost time injury frequency rate, taking it out, where does that get reported, or are we not reporting it?
Through the chair, we are reporting it. We have one of our graphs is to look at the contract hours, and it's worked out on incidents, which also includes property damage. It's not just general across the board when there is a national benchmarking tool that they use and for injury rates, and that's where an injury is determined to be loss of time getting that from the contractors to actually be able to get that just right. There's a lot of factors that come into that. So we did ours where it was looking at our incident rate against it, which is actually put into that report, how that gets worked out. And also I put that in there as a cross for discussion, was that as we're moving into progressing into these lead indicators, into trying to get more focus on the lead indicators as opposed to the lag indicators, which have already been and gone. So that's just that was one of the reasons, and just with generally what other councils are doing too, in line with them, they're moving away from that. So still happy to report it as we are, if that is really of benefit to you to interpret results. But that was the where I was coming from when I put that up.
What you're saying is there's other indicators that better explain the issue than that one. So in which case, if you've taken that one out, would you not put some other indicators in there instead?
Well, I think we already have got those in there, because we have our incidents, we have our events and our safety observations, and we have our contractor hours. And
that's what I'm saying. They're not on this. I'm referring to the table.
Okay.
That's not described in the table. While you're reporting on it, that's great. It's not described in the table. I guess that's my point.
So we can put those measures in there in particular. Yes, certainly.
Yeah, I think through you, Mr. Chair, we've almost kind of talked around it. So we've got, in terms of notifiable events, in the table above in terms of internal assurance under the risks.
Yeah, so it's internal, external. It's just a question of where it fits. Yeah. Okay.
So it might just be us needing to kind of tweak a bit of that language to actually be more specific about what we are already.
We're doing better than what's there, but it does.
Yeah.
We're not showing it.
I tried to cross-reference your report to this last night, and I've concluded that
pretty much
a lot more.
That's why I emailed Doug.
Pretty much impossible.
And so but the most important for me is we don't need more reporting. We just need the most critical reporting things. And so if we can cut your workload down and focused on the things you need to focus on, take the rule to that's I agree with the lag and the indicators, and contractors are a separate part of our business. There's almost our business. And then our contractors are a certain, you've got a lot of reporting coming in from them, and the spotlight's on those people big time anyway. And so and that will always be a timing thing in terms of the time we get that sort of data coming through. As long as we've got our shop is match fit. Well, in terms of that internal assurance stuff. That was just an observation as well. So if you've got an opportunity to tighten up what you're doing and making sure that your leaders, your decision makers, the people who are doing the training and supporting our people out there have got the data they need. The data is probably more powerful for your purposes than it is for ours. So ours is just a consolidation of that.
So I think it's probably an opportunity, Mr. Chair, for you and I to continue to refine this as we go through. And in particular how we see it. Again, this is the first time it's been back here in 3 years.
Maybe your external reviewer has a crack at this. Because they're there as well. They've got these are seen thousands of other policy documents around. I'm not saying that we need to rewrite it, but it'd be good if they're here next week or this week when they're here tomorrow. Okay. You don't run the board. I'm saying it's best practice. There's a couple of things you don't really need. There's a couple of things you should put in. That's 90.
Can I just suggest that it actually has a review component to it, meaning not just a suggestion of best practice, but actually I go down this list of things here, and like you said, you can't find the actual answer to it in the reporting. So at least someone can go through it and say, well, yes, actually critical risk control checks percentage to standard. I can confirm for you that has actually happened. And do you know what I mean? So there is a, not just a best practice reflection, but actually, have we actually achieved it at this table? And I even think of the things that are like directly in the fingers of the five of us in the committee, which are governance competency assessment and CPD update and a 3-yearly governance review. Well, but those are directly the things in the hands that we have sitting at this table. And have we done a self-reflection that says we've done those things?
No,
We haven't asked that question. So we're kind of going from signing off, we've done that 3 years of responsibility to set the new ones. We actually haven't signed off that we've done it.
I gave up. Sorry. Cross reference when I got to that part, but that's a very good example.
One other thing that I would just suggest, maybe in the front end of the charter, we actually talk a little bit to our actual Central Hawke's Bay District Council. There's lots of legislative stuff in here, but what is it that's about us? What is it about our business model that is relevant to how we manage health and safety? So that's where we bring in this language of we run a business model, which is a contractor business model. And so that's in what we look at and part of our responsibilities. And so page 60 of the agenda, which kind of has the intent, purpose, governance, duties, policies and strategies. That could say Hamilton City Council, not Central Hawke's Bay District Council. What is it that's particular about us as a PCBU and our business model that makes us relevant?
So my suggestion, Mr. Chair, is we just leave it on the table. It's been a really good discussion. And we'll pick those bits of feedback up, loop them back around and bring it back. And probably maybe some time you and I directly can have as well. Ahead of it coming back to.
Yeah, through the chair, that's really good for me, because now we've get that understanding of the expectation and how we can support that to provide you with the information you need to be able to do your due diligence at the governance table. And we've got that training coming up in May, which will support that. But Impact once again, health and safety training governance, and with Eve tomorrow. So that was on the list for me for Eve as part of the printouts for her to review. So that's quite exciting. For
charter as well. Might even be included in the charter as well as a regular event.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing when you.
Exactly.
It seems that we're doing this stuff over here and we've got the charter over there and there's a disconnect.
Yeah, totally. And yes.
And we have Te Korowai independent performance assessment coming into the business at the beginning of May as well. And this is the kind of thing safety space they'll look at. So previous assessments have been that health and safety has had a really good ground up culture in the business, but the top down culture from here hasn't been so strong. Well, the reflection of have we done this is actually potentially something that they look like to go with. Have we done it?
Through the chair, that gives us a good chance to support each other.
Yes,
And that's what this is all about. Having, when we've got disconnect, things don't flow and run smoothly and things, run off meeting each other's objectives.
Should have that way, the other way that we'll put the top table is no good. I think we do need to join and the most important thing is you've got all the resources that are and we are just a cascade of that in terms of giving visibility to the things that we're doing. So really good work at your level, and just we've got to get a bit more done on ours. So the recommendation now is to leave that.
Just don't. I'm happy just to leave it as it is.
Okay, all comfortable with that. I'm going to leave it as, and we'll come back. So thank you very much. Most appreciation. Okay.
Enjoy the sun.
Enjoy the sun.
Treasury management.
Treasury management.
Page 64.
Hi, how are you?
Hey. So the report you have in front of you is the standard report that comes to this committee each time it meets. So I won't dwell too much on it, other than to say that the construction season is underway, but it has had a bit of a slow start this year, which has seen that council is actually holding some funds in term deposit at the end of February. and that no new debt was drawn in the quarter leading up to the end of February. The PDT team tell me that they're well into construction and that this will change before the end of the year. So hopefully by the end of the year, all those term deposits will have been consumed and we'll be back into potentially borrowing again.
And maybe just Mr. Chamber on that note as well. Well, this week we've got a external project consultant giving us some assurance on our project delivery currently. It's another layer of robustness in terms of delivery financial.
You'll see at the top of page 65 a list of all our current debt and the interest rates that we're paying on them. And you'll be encouraged to see that all the floating rates are being reset every 90 days and are coming down. That very top one is one that expired earlier in the year. And you can see that at the time it expired, we're paying 6%. And now they're all 4.6, 4.7%. So that's good to see. You'll see also on the top of page 66 what's happening with the swap interest rate market. So that graph that is there is the 3-year swap. And you'll see that at the moment we're in a period where the swap rates are staying relatively static and that the market is pricing in well ahead of time all the OCR rate adjustments that are coming through. So at the moment, we're in a period of relatively stable interest rates. Again, on top of page 68, it gives you a graph there that shows the council's expected debt going forward, assuming that we retain Three Waters and we carry on the current projection of all the upgrades that we're doing. So that's what that grey shaded area is. And then the two red lines show what the upper and lower bands are in terms of how much council should be holding as fixed debt. And then the blue and green shows what we are in fact holding. So you'll see that we're compliant with policy, but we're sitting towards the bottom of policy, particularly the further out you go. And that's a purposeful decision, reflecting that while we have all these programs in our forward program in terms of the capital works, there is some uncertainty around the timing and how quickly we'll draw that debt, and there is also uncertainty around the Hawke's Bay water model and what that might mean for the council going forward. So we've just been running at the minimums. You'll also see a simple line graph at the bottom of page 68, which is the interest rate yield curve at the moment. You'll see that that's looking more like a normal curve instead of an inverted curve that we've seen recently. It shows that in the short term, we're expected to see a few more OCR adjustments and then a pause. And obviously, the further out you go, the more uncertain we are about the future. And so that's where the interest, the risk profile gets added back in, and you see the interest rates starting to tick up the further out you go. Again, top of page 69, some of our KPIs that we report against in terms of our compliance, and they're all green, so I won't dwell too much on those. And then just to say that, again, on page 69, there's some quotes there from Bancorp following the last OCR round. So the concern about inflation seems to be largely off the table now. The concern is more around economic slowdown and spare capacity in the markets. And since this has been written more recently, what our friend Donald Trump is doing with tariffs and how that might affect New Zealand and the rest of the world economy. I'll take that as read, but happy to answer any questions that you have on the Treasury. management here at council.
Thank you. Updates, questions?
Yeah, Brent and I had a discussion about the benchmark calculation cost of funds, and it would appear that maybe we're not calculating it correctly. The bank will not calculating it correctly. I just wondered if you've got any further with that.
No, so on top of page 67, we've got some weightings of historical swap rates and working out a deemed expected interest rate that council should be achieving. The way that I've done this is based on how the Bancorp benchmark is calculated, but the rates that I'm using here are straight from the Reserve Bank. So they are the wholesale rates. And Mike and myself had a discussion about actually we pay retail rates, not wholesale rates. So are I actually making the picture look worse by using wholesale rates? And should there be a margin added on for the difference between wholesale and retail? And that's strictly correct that I am actually making it look worse, that the gap probably would be more like 3.7 versus 4.8 that I'm showing here. Also bearing in mind that a lot of the borrowing that council has done has been in the last sort of since 2021 when we started the big water stories, and some of these benchmarks go back 7 years, which was a period that council wasn't borrowing. So again, it's a little bit hard when you're comparing against a benchmark that covers a period that council wasn't indebted to the same level as it is now.
No. Well, Michael? Well done. Oh, good.
That's fine. That's it'll get sorted. It just makes it look better, because I couldn't understand why it was so big, and then I thought, and I had to just scratch my head and figured it out. So yes,
Right.
doesn't need to be fixed.
Thank you very much for that, Brent. The recommendation there is to note the treasury management report. I've got a move on a second, please. Michael, seconder, thank you very much. We're all in favour?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. Thank you. Motion carried. Thank you for that. And now we move through to the 17th expenses. Expenses. Take that paper
As read, yeah.
as read.
It's just, again, it's just light and transparency.
Yeah.
Just a question on it. I read the policy on all this. Aren't councillors able to claim mileage to and from work? So why is some of them are not showing it? Is that they haven't put their return in, or were they just not doing it because they're great people?
No, most of us don't.
That's right. I just wondered if it was an accounting issue or it was just a.
I'm wondering what my 198 is. That was meant to be a conference, wasn't it? Not Kevin.
We can find out.
It doesn't matter. So I know it was the conference in Wellington. Is that Wellington conference?
So we just on, and again, we made a, Mr. Chair, we made a change in these tables. Been the end of last year, so it's still a manual process. We've got some GL still to line up around where we code costs too. So it's a bit of a manual transaction still lining up what those first two columns.
It's maybe also worth noting that there is a phone and data bit that happens once a year for councillors.
Correct. So the mayor is the only councillor that has a work phone actually provided. The rest of the councillors get a once a year reimbursement through the payroll system, and that hasn't happened quite yet for this current financial year.
The other thing, Mike, just in your comment about the mileage thing, is that I'm also pretty clear in the expectations that don't virtue signal over that. In terms of whether you claim it or you don't, there's actually, it's a barrier for someone to be in a job, then it's absolutely fine for them to be claiming it. And it's not something that people who don't claim it should be trying to grandstand or virtue signal on. And so it's a very, if it's needed, it's needed, and there's no opinion from the rest of us on it.
Yeah, no, it's a personal thing. I was more concerned about the accounting than why hadn't we done it if we should have done it? That's all I was worried about. I'm not interested in what people want to do. That's their business. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Are we comfortable to note that report? We're going to second it. Thank you. And we're happy to carry that motion. Favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Carried. Righty ho. Moving now to the emissions trading report. Trying to catch up on that. Oh, Brent, thank you very much. Very comprehensive explanation here.
Yep.
We'll hand over to you. Just please take the papers, read, and highlight anything you need to.
Yeah, so council is part of the emissions trading scheme by virtue of the fact that we have a landfill. We are required to buy carbon credits because we produce waste and deliver it to a landfill, which then emits methane gas as the landfill waste breaks down. We have a draft policy that's been on the table for a while to do with how we manage buying and trading in the carbon market. And that's what's being presented here, along with an update on what exactly we hold in the way of carbon credits. Essentially, our council has a fairly small and simple landfill, and we're required to purchase 1.02 carbon credits for every tonne of waste that goes to the landfill. Landfills with that are larger quite often have carbon methane captures and flaring devices, and that allows them to request a targeted methane, well, a targeted rate at which they buy carbon credits, which is less than that. Our volumes historically have been about 12,000 tonne of waste going to our landfill every year. With recent downturn in the economy and increased focus on waste diversion, we're currently operating at a more like a 9,000 tonne per annum. You'll see over the page, on page 76, the carbon price over the past sort of 9 months is starting to trend back up. This is still well off the highs that were occurring in September 22, where the price exceeded $90 a tonne. And then through some changes in policy direction and setting, the price fell all the way back down to 34 in 2023, and now it's moving back up. You'll see again at the bottom of page 76, one of the main ways of buying carbon credits is through the government auctions, and the government has a floor price which is steadily increasing over the next few years, currently at $68 a tonne, and will move all the way through to $82 a tonne by 2029. Over the page, on page 77, shows what our current situation is following the recent submission of our emissions our solid waste volumes through to the government department that deals with carbon credits. So once we settle all those in May, we'll have approximately 4,500 carbon credits on hand. And then we've got some forward contracts for the next 2 years to buy some further ones. The only other thing that isn't in this report, but is also important to bear in mind, is that our landfill consent expires in 2030. So again, we have to be mindful that we don't buy too many carbon credits into the future, because we're working through a process at the moment around that consent and the future of the landfill here in Central Hawke's Bay. Other than that, attached is the policy position that we're currently operating under. Hasn't formally been adopted, and again, we want to test the will of this committee to send it to the Finance and Infrastructure Committee for adoption.
Thank you. Councillor.
Probably, yeah, I'm not sure if this is a suitable question for you, Brent, or for Mr. Hon, but if when you buy a carbon credit for a ton of waste, does that cover it for the life of the waste? Or when and if the landfill was to be closed, obviously methane still being expelled.
Correct.
Do you no longer have to pay?
No, so the obligation is at the time that the waste is put into the landfill. It is deemed to cover, well, it's designed to be a disincentive so it doesn't get there in the first place. And yeah, so there's no further obligations post landfill closure, other than the council has to carry on monitoring the site, and there is a compliance program that carries on beyond the closure, but it's not anything to do with the ETS scheme.
Questions. So the next of our waste, there's that coalition factor, whatever it is that a standard factor across everybody, is it?
That's the standard factor that has been set by the Ministry of the Environment based on the average waste going to the average landfill.
So we average or we not average?
We're considered average. So
Okay.
yeah, so just from my experience in this landfill space, you've got, basically you need some type of methane, whether it's a gas flare or something of that. But you've got to kind of demonstrably demonstrate that you are offsetting your methane. And we're just too small to justify. There'll be part of that we'll work through with councillors.
Going back to Brent's point, is trying to disincentivize waste in the first place. It's like Wellington, where there's a lot of food waste and prison works and all that sort of carrying going in there versus we probably just have concrete and like iron and I don't know. Does that
We don't accept concrete.
Anyway, so that's the standard we've got to accept. It's not going to be. The second question I had then was just around our relationship with Tararua. So we are managing they send their stuff to us. So we're taking that 9,000 tonnes you talked about, our waste and their waste combined.
Yeah, so roughly speaking, 40% of the waste that goes to the landfill is coming from our curbside and our transfer stations. Another 40% is coming from Tararua's, and the remaining 20% is the commercial operators picking up the wheelie bins and bringing it to our landfill, or the demolition companies coming direct to our landfill.
So when Tararua arrives with its rubbish every week or daily, whatever it is, do they get charged the same rate that commercial guy would be charged? We have to pick out the ETS risk.
So every ton that comes to the landfill exposes us to an ETS risk, and theoretically that's why we're buying on the forward market, so that we know in advance what our costs would be, so it can be built into the gate fee, and each operator has a gate fee that has been negotiated through.
Tararua as an operator.
Correct.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Right. So we're taking on their ETS risk basically.
Correct.
Any other questions? Yes.
Can we just talk about the table on page 85 of the policy? I just want to understand the marrying up. On the first page of the policy, we talk about the policy being risk averse and not. talk to me about how you've translated that into the ratings, the maximum hedging ratings that you've put in there.
So essentially what we're trying to avoid is a situation where we're setting the gate fee shortly for the year starting in July, which will go all the way through to June 2026. Because the ETS operates on a calendar year, the 2026 stuff doesn't actually get settled and we pay the carbon credits until 2027. So we need to know a long way in advance. And so the way that this table is set is basically saying before we get to December, we have to know 100% what we're going to pay. But when we're talking about stuff that we're setting in June, we should have at least 75% of our liability already banked, so to speak. So that's why those percentages are in there. But I'm happy to be guided as to whether we want to be more or less risk averse and increase or decrease those.
We in the past, to be fair, probably before you, Brent, saved our users a huge amount of money actually by being a bit speculative, which is buying a large number of credits when the price was low. That were 5-6 years, and enough to take us through quite a period. So, and on the flip side, and because of that, there was not a good policy in place for how to manage it. And so when they'd expired, then we got burnt at the other end. So I totally get that. But I suppose just understanding is there how you've set this up here. Basically, we're only dealing with this current budget's volumes and a little bit of the next budget's volumes potentially, but there's no further forward purchase.
So as you can see on the table on page 77, we've actually got enough for this year plus the next 2 years already locked and loaded, because my feel is that the price is going to continue to go up. And certainly that's what the government's indicating at the moment. Obviously, at the moment, what I'm trying to do is do that through forward contracts. So I'm buying the volume, but not committing the cash until closer to the time. I could be buying on the open market now and potentially getting them cheaper. The downside is if I buy them on the open market now and hold them, which is what you were suggesting happened prior to my time, is that I have to commit the cash right now because I'm buying them on the open market and just holding them. And we're talking about $1 million worth of carbon credits a year. It depends on how far in advance you want me to pay the cash and have that sitting there.
0.5%.
So it's a hedge, the hedging, it's speaking, okay.
Yeah, so my forward contracts are, I'm promising to pay in May 2026 a certain amount, and in May 27 another certain amount. But I don't have to hand over the physical dollars until those dates, even though I have locked in the price.
So I'm not suggesting that you go and speculate on the open market. Please don't misinterpret me. But I'm asking the question because it has been an advantage in the past and it has burnt us in the past. We've had a policy, and sometimes how we have to test these policies is to make sure there's not unintended consequences of, particularly if it's really risk averse, that there's not an unintended consequence that actually we lose some flexibility.
Because the hedge is actually then setting the charges.
Exactly.
And so as long as net and we're not got a unproductive, we're twice as expensive dump stuff, then we don't dump it. Straight into the dump.
So the only other option that Mike and I talked about briefly on the telephone was, while I am entering into forward contracts and I have a promise to pay and a promise to buy in the future, is you can go potentially, and I haven't tested this with Westpac yet, is actually have an option to buy instead of a promise to buy. The downside with that is obviously you are paying another fee because you are not locking the volume in. You are taking an option to lock the volume in. I'm not sure, given that the only way I can buy carbon credits on the forward market at the moment is through Westpac, and they are the only vendor that will deal with someone with my volumes. I'm not sure how open to that they would be, but I can certainly test that.
Just on the forward price, the forward price, is that a premium or at a discount to the current price?
So again, because the people that we're buying off know what's happening with the floor, they are factoring that in. So if I'm buying for 2028 now, I'd be paying more than what I would buy if I actually went in.
They're a premium. So what I'm trying to work out is a cash and carry, right? So you can buy them now and then fund them to there, and there's a cost in doing that, or you can buy them on the forward market, and sometimes there's an arbitrage between it, and sometimes they might be charging a huge premium. So sometimes we might be better to buy them spot and then hold them as opposed to buying in the forward market. Or alternatively, it could be a better option to buy in the forward market because people think prices are going to fall, and they might be artificially held down.
Yeah, so there's always this way up between my future price versus buying and carrying the interest cost of holding them for an extended period.
So well, I'm just trying to discover that you're onto that. That's good. So the other risk we haven't talked about, because we're all thinking price is going to go up and we want to get more of these things. The other thing to think about is, well, what happens if the price collapses and we lose Tararua and we're holding all these carbon credits? So that's another thing. So do you want to talk about that and how that fits vis-a-vis the 50% that we've got in here? And well, is the model that the limits we've got robust enough to cope with things like that?
Yeah, and that's why in our draft policy, and again, it's only draft, so I'm happy to play with the percentages, that for beyond year 3 to year 5, I'm only allowed to speculate up to 50% of what I think I need. Beyond year 5, I have to come to council and get a council resolution just to stop me going and saying, right, well, let's lock ourselves in for umpteen dozen years, because we don't know what the future holds. And as we saw back in 2022, at a stroke of a pen, the government can change their policy and we can either be really in the money or really out of the money. And we're not here to make money on carbon credits. We're here to make sure that we can collect, buy them at a reasonable rate and pass that cost on with some certainty so that when we come to settle the bill, we don't find ourselves short.
So we know with certainty our own curbside, I think you said 40%, was it?
About 4,000 tonne.
So whatever the percentage is, so we should be able to align that with our policy. So we know for certain that we're probably going to get that unless people don't put the rubbish out. Well, what's the chance of people not putting rubbish out and not doing it? It's pretty low. So we know that for sure. Tararua is a bit of a risk. So we need to factor that somewhere in there. So I think that's the logic in terms of how we should set the limits. So we need to test those against the limit. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So just to push back a little bit, yes, 4,000 is guaranteed because CHB's waste is always going to be CHB's waste.
Yeah.
The risk that we don't fully understand, because we're working through a Section 17A review at the moment and we've got a consent looming, is whether council continues to own and operate a landfill long term.
Mm-hmm.
So if council decided to become a little bit like Tararua and stop dealing with their own waste, we'd still be collecting it, but we'd be putting it to someone else and paying a gate fee somewhere else, and we wouldn't require a carbon credit at all. We would be paying it through a gate fee to someone else who's managing this risk. So we've got 2 years with carbon credits. I'm a little bit reluctant at this stage while this process is being worked through to buy beyond that.
Okay. That's good. That all makes sense. Yeah. But is that reflected in the policy? So we're relying on you to get that right, and I'm sure you will. Does the policy reflect that? I think the answer is no, it doesn't.
The start point, you've already got so many credits. The actual start point is consistent with the policy too, so we don't need to sort out, do we? So
yeah. Again, we hold at the end of May, 4,000 carbon credits. We could, if we chose to, put those on the market and sell them. We don't have to hold those carbon credits. The fact that we know that in the future, we will need them at some point. There's no point in me speculating and buying and selling, but if we got to the point that we had no Tararua anymore and I was holding way too many carbon credits, we could certainly look at becoming a seller as well as a buyer and holder, which is what we're doing at the moment.
No, all my questions.
Yeah, just one other question I've got in there is about the bank authorities in there. It's not clear. It talks about in general terms, but there should be a exchange of letters between us and the bank to say, you know, you're a dealer at the bank and someone else's, and the bank's got you on their thing. So no one else can deal with those carbon credits other than what's been agreed by a paper, by a transfer letter.
So at the moment, Doug and I are the only two that sign these exchanges, and it requires the two of us.
That's signing the confirmation, but it's the person who can initiate the deal verbally at the bank. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay, yeah. So at the moment, it's for practicality purposes, I'm the one that's talking to the bank, and then both Doug and I need to sign the confirmation that before the deal is completed and executed.
So could we have that reflecting in the policy so there's a process exchange for letters and stuff? Yep.
So just adding, we've got delegation manual, so it's just the interface into that. So we'll just use some language around in connection to council's existing delegation manuals.
So, but then the financial delegations don't have it to execute this policy. They're sufficiently big. Right. Good questions?
You done on that topic? I just wonder whether the description, Brent, that you just gave of the thought process that you're going through in terms of how you're managing this, I can't quite see that in the policy. It's almost there, but not quite. And at the bottom of page 85 of the agenda, talks about developing strategies to manage obligations, and it says that it sits actually with GM's CID,
Right.
which is not you.
No.
And it's missing some components, like it doesn't talk about landfill consent lengths and kind of managing volumes in those bullet points. So they say council approved types of units, ongoing amendments to ETS regulatory change, surrender dates, prevailing prices. There's kind of some bullet points there that are part of how you need to assess it. But the policy doesn't say that it's you, it says that it's.
Okay, I can change that and add in about the consent, and we probably also need to add in about negotiations with neighbouring councils as well, having an impact.
Yeah, and also on the reporting, I just lost my my agenda, but it would be really good to get a report from you. Maybe, I don't know how often you do this, maybe quarterly, 6 monthly, about where we're at with things like you've done in the paper, but also what you're thinking in the future, like what the strategy is going forward. What are you thinking? We're gonna go for the 100%, or we're going for the 50, or we're going to target 25 because we're not sure where Tararua is. We're not sure, where our consent is. We just want to understand the strategy and what your thinking is, so that we can align with you and say, yeah, we think you're on the right track. That would be really helpful. Sure. If you could put that in the policy, put that in the report. There's about 5 things you report on there. You can put that in there as well, what the future strategy is.
Okay.
What your thinking is. Thank you.
Questions? So we have a recommendation here. The one of one to bring back. There's a couple of little things that we want you to change there, Brent, but there's nothing of any substantial nature. Do we want this put back, or we want to delegate this to?
I would suggest that there is a recommendation that says, with suggested changes, that the Risk and Assurance Committee recommends that the Finance Committee considers this as for adoption. Yeah, I don't think I need to add an extra loop
No, I
around.
don't think so either.
They're probably going to ask some of the same questions that we've asked again, and Brent will have the answers because he's at a dress rehearsal. I would be comfortable.
He could run the amendments just by us on the email if he
That's
wanted
right.
to, and then we'd all be comfortable that what we thought we were getting, we were getting.
Yeah.
And then that
I'm
color,
good with that.
and that makes it simple.
The recommendation is we will adopt the report with.
With no amendment.
Last us to. Through the committees, okay, so we want to. Move that, thank you. It's either. Aye. Carried. Right. Next meeting date is in our diaries for the 11th of June, is that all? Diaries, it's in diaries for the afternoon at 1 o'clock. And
Yeah, that's a next meeting of the risk and assurance committee held on 11.
oh, okay, yep, so the recommendation is we have our next audit risk committee meeting on the 10th of June, starting at 1 o'clock here in council offices. Are we all in favour? Yes.
And I will move it second.
Second, and thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. Right. Righty ho. So we're now moving into public excluded.
It's got that last section to go. So just ignore it.
Oh, yeah. So, well, the recommendation that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting. The general subject matter of each matter to be considered while the public is excluded. The reason for passing this resolution is in relation to each matter and the specific grounds under section 48 of the Government Information and Meetings Act 1987 for the passing of this resolution as follows.
And so it's for this item 8.1 being the principal risks and issues for discussion.
Yeah. So so that's the reason for the general subject for this is the 8.1 principal risks and issues for this discussion. Move it in a second, please. Yeah.
No, it's got it.
Yeah. We're in favour.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Thank you very much, public.